The hushed reverence of the boardroom was a symphony Evelyn Thorne had orchestrated countless times. Today, the applause was particularly robust, a resounding testament to the colossal merger she had just brokered, securing Thorne Industries' dominion over a burgeoning global market. The crisp sound, however, resonated not as a triumph in her ears, but as a cruel mockery. It was a sound Lily would never hear. A sudden, sharp image of her daughter, small and silent, flickered across Evelyn's mind's eye, a fleeting intrusion that, despite its brevity, managed to eclipse the professional euphoria swelling around her. The celebratory clinking of champagne flutes, the congratulatory handshakes, the admiring gazes, all dissolved into a blur. All she could feel was a phantom ache in her chest, a familiar emptiness that success, no matter how monumental, could never fill. Evelyn, CEO of Thorne Industries, a name synonymous with ruthless efficiency and an almost mythical Midas touch, possessed a life that, on paper, was flawless. Her net worth was staggering, her influence undeniable, her empire expanding with relentless precision. Yet, beneath the veneer of designer suits and steel-cold composure, resided a mother haunted by a single, agonizing truth. She could not make her deaf daughter smile. Not a real smile. Not one that reached Lily's eyes and crinkled the corners of her small face with uninhibited joy. The polite, often fleeting curve of her lips that Evelyn occasionally coaxed out was a poor imitation, a shadow of the happiness she so desperately craved for her only child. Every resource, every expert, every cutting-edge technology money could buy had been thrown at the problem. Yet Lily remained largely sequestered behind a silent wall, her emotions a carefully guarded secret. Evelyn, a woman who commanded legions and swayed economies, felt utterly powerless in the face of her daughter's quiet solitude. Thorne Industries' headquarters was a monolith of polished chrome and reinforced glass, a gleaming testament to Evelyn's ambition, soaring above the sprawling cityscape. Her corner office, occupying the highest floor, offered a panoramic view that could inspire awe or, in Evelyn's case, a profound sense of isolation. Here, decisions worth billions were made with swift, decisive strokes. Here, the hum of servers and the muted symphony of 1,000 employees working in unison formed the backdrop to her life. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across her pristine desk, Evelyn often found herself staring out at the twinkling grid of urban lights, a hollowness expanding within her. Her home, a minimalist masterpiece perched on a secluded hill, felt even emptier. It was there that Lily spent most of her time, surrounded by state-of-the-art educational tools, dedicated nannies, and a rotating cast of specialized therapists and teachers. Lily, a child of 10 with eyes the color of deep sea and hair like spun moonlight, moved through this meticulously curated existence with an ethereal quietude, observing the world with a discernment that often made Evelyn uncomfortable. The silence that enveloped Lily was a constant, almost physical presence in Evelyn's life, a stark contrast to the cacophony of her professional world. The core of Evelyn's conflict was a silent, internal scream. She built empires, but she could not build a bridge to her daughter's heart. Lily's deafness was diagnosed young, a crushing blow that had rocked Evelyn's perfectly ordered world. The initial grief had quickly hardened into a fierce determination. She would overcome this, just as she had overcome every other obstacle in her life. She invested in cochlear implants, underwent countless consultations, hired the most lauded specialists in pediatric audiology and deaf education. But technology, she learned, could amplify sound, not understanding. It could facilitate communication, but it could not conjure emotional connection where a profound barrier existed. Lily communicated, yes, through sign language taught by dedicated instructors, and through a complex system of gestures and facial expressions. But the genuine, spontaneous joy, the carefree abandon Evelyn yearned to see, remained elusive. Reports from Lily's specialized academy, though always positive regarding her academic progress and social integration, to a degree, invariably noted her reserved nature, her tendency to withdraw into her own world. Each report was a fresh wound, a reminder of Evelyn's perceived failure. She was a CEO, a titan, yet she couldn't make her own child truly happy. This perceived inadequacy was a gnawing torment, a crack in the otherwise impenetrable fortress of her self-identity. The relentless drive that propelled Evelyn to the apex of the corporate world had roots in a childhood marked by scarcity and struggle. Might she had learned early that power was the ultimate shield, wealth the ultimate tool. She had clawed her way up, sacrificed relationships, deferred personal desires, all to build an unshakable foundation. When Lily arrived, an unexpected blessing, Evelyn had vowed to give her everything she herself had lacked. But the universe, in its cruel irony, had presented a challenge that wealth and power alone could not conquer. The question that often haunted Evelyn in the darkest hours was whether her relentless pursuit of success had somehow contributed to Lily's emotional distance. Had her infrequent presence, her often distracted attention, created an unbreachable chasm? She pushed the thought away, a familiar defense mechanism. There was no time for self-recrimination. There was only the next deal, the next quarter, the next problem to solve. These open loops in her personal life remained perpetually unresolved, tucked away in a corner of her mind she rarely dared to visit. Evelyn's days were a blur of jet lag and power lunches. Her personal assistant, Clara, a woman of almost superhuman efficiency, managed her schedule with military precision. Mornings began before dawn, fueled by strong coffee and global market reports. Meetings stretched into the afternoon, interrupted only by urgent calls from Tokyo or London. Evenings often involved networking dinners or late-night calls to distant time zones. Lily was woven into this complex tapestry through brief scheduled video calls, carefully selected gifts delivered by Clara, and weekend visits that felt less like family time and more like carefully choreographed events. Evelyn would try to engage Lily, showing her picture books, thus attempting rudimentary signs Clara had taught her, but the conversations often felt stilted, the connection fragile. Lily, always polite, always observant, would offer a small, almost imperceptible nod or a gentle squeeze of Evelyn's hand, but the spark Evelyn craved was absent. One Tuesday, however, a critical flight was unexpectedly grounded due to unforeseen technical issues. A meticulously planned trip to Singapore, crucial for the finalization of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, was suddenly delayed by a full day. Evelyn, unaccustomed to unscheduled downtime, felt an unfamiliar restlessness. Clara, ever proactive, had already rescheduled all pressing engagements. Evelyn found herself with an afternoon entirely free, an anomaly in her highly structured existence. Instead of retreating to her office to catch up on emails, a sudden, inexplicable urge pulled her in a different direction. Lily's Academy. It was an hour's drive, far from the corporate district, nestled amidst a leafy suburban enclave. Evelyn rarely picked Lily up herself, usually delegating the task to her trusted driver, Michael. But today, a quiet pull, an almost desperate need for unmediated connection, guided her. She told Michael to take the day off and, with a subtle shift in her tightly wound demeanor, ordered a car for herself, heading towards the academy during its after-school activity period. As Evelyn's sleek black sedan pulled up to the academy, a modern, sprawling campus, designed with vibrant, accessible spaces, she felt an unfamiliar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Children, hearing and deaf alike, were engaged in various activities on the expansive playground. Now, some chased each other, their laughter echoing. Others gathered in small groups, communicating through a fluid dance of hands and expressions. She spotted Lily near the edge of the playground, sitting alone on a swing set, gently swaying back and forth. Her eyes, as always, were fixed on the other children, a wistful, almost melancholic expression on her face. She was not playing, not interacting, merely observing. Evelyn's heart contracted. It was a familiar sight, one that amplified her feeling of helplessness, a bitter reminder of the invisible wall that separated Lily from the effortless camaraderie of her peers. Evelyn watched, hidden behind the tinted windows of the car, a silent observer of her daughter's quiet isolation. The scene played out like a recurring nightmare. Lily, surrounded by possibilities, yet untouched by them. Evelyn felt a familiar ache, a profound sense of maternal failure washing over her, cold and heavy. Then he appeared. A man, unassuming in a simple t-shirt and jeans, with a kind, open face, framed by slightly disheveled brown hair. He wasn't one of the teachers or staff Evelyn recognized from her occasional official visits. He moved with an easy grace, his attention seemingly drawn to the younger children, helping one retrieve a stray ball, offering a reassuring word to another. He knelt to tie a shoelace, his movements patient and deliberate. Evelyn, her gaze still fixed on Lily, noticed him glance in her daughter's direction. He paused, a gentle smile touching his lips. Then he began to walk towards Lily. Evelyn tensed, a prickle of unease rippling through her. She had seen countless adults try to engage Lily, their efforts often clumsy, well-intentioned, but ultimately futile. She braced herself for the inevitable awkwardness, the polite but distant reaction from her daughter. He approached Lily slowly, his hands held casually at his sides, his posture relaxed. He didn't speak, a detail Evelyn noted with a flicker of surprise. Instead, he simply knelt before Lily, meeting her gaze at eye level. His expression was soft, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Then his hands began to move. Not the stiff, formal signs Evelyn sometimes saw her daughter's tutors use, but something different. Fluid, graceful, almost lyrical. His fingers danced in the air, creating shapes and movements that seemed to weave a story out of thin air. His face was alive with expression, his eyebrows rising and falling, his mouth forming silent words that conveyed emotion even without sound. He paused, his gaze fixed on Lily, as if inviting her into a shared secret. Lily's head, which had been bowed slightly, slowly lifted. Her wide, luminous eyes, usually so guarded, widened further, fixed intently on his moving hands. A flicker, a small, almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor. He continued, his hands painting pictures in the air, his face radiating warmth and a playful energy. He made a funny, exaggerated gesture, a silent chuckle escaping him, and then mimed a large, clumsy creature lumbering through the air. And then, it happened. A tiny tremor started at the corner of Lily's mouth. Her eyes, previously so serious, began to sparkle. A small, involuntary gasp escaped Evelyn's lips, unheard within the confines of her car as she watched, mesmerized, utterly transfixed. The tremor grew, spread, and then, slowly, beautifully, a radiant, unburdened smile broke across Lily's face. It was genuine. It was pure. It reached her eyes, crinkling the corners, making them dance with an unadulterated joy Evelyn had never witnessed before. It was a smile that transformed Lily's entire countenance, erasing the habitual quietude, replacing it with a burst of light that was almost blinding. Evelyn felt a jolt, as if struck by lightning, a tremor that shook her to her very core. Her breath hitched in her throat, tears suddenly blurring her vision, hot and unexpected. This was it. This was the smile she had dreamed of, prayed for, spent fortunes trying to elicit, and it had been brought forth by a complete stranger, a man of simple appearance, through an act of intuitive, effortless communication. The meticulously constructed world Evelyn Thorne inhabited, her empire of glass and steel, her carefully cultivated image of control and power, all of it shattered in that singular, breathtaking moment. The corporate battles, the financial triumphs, the endless pursuit of more, it all faded into utter insignificance. All that mattered was the vision of her daughter, Lily, truly, genuinely smiling. The sight burned itself into Evelyn's memory, a beacon of bewildering joy and a profound, unsettling challenge to everything she thought she knew. Her world, in that instant, had been irrevocably altered. What did this mean? What was this man's secret? And how had he unlocked a joy in Lily that she, her own mother, had failed to achieve? The questions swirled, demanding answers she didn't yet possess, pulling her deeper into a narrative she had just stumbled upon. The quiet hum of the executive suite, usually a balm of measured productivity for Eleanor Vance, now vibrated with a discordant frequency, a residual echo of the impossible. The image of Lily's face, not just smiling, but incandescent with an unbridled, pure joy, was seared into Eleanor's mind, a photographic negative against the stark reality of her daughter's often reserved world. It wasn't merely a fleeting curve of the lips. It was a total bodily surrender to mirth, a genuine, resounding happiness that had, until this moment, been the elusive quarry of Eleanor's most fervent wishes and bottomless resources. She stood frozen, the warmth of Lily's small hand having just slipped from hers. The weight of a world irrevocably shifted, pressing down. That man, the single father, a transient figure in her marble and glass domain, had performed a silent, profound magic that hours of trained therapists, specialized programs, and years of her own relentless efforts had never quite unlocked. He had simply knelt, offered a gesture, and the barriers around her daughter had melted. The sheer audacity of it, the effortless grace with which he'd bridged the chasm of communication, left Eleanor breathless, a strange cocktail of awe and a nascent, unfamiliar humiliation churning within her. Her world, once defined by control, strategy, and predictable outcomes, now felt precariously balanced on the memory of a single, unexpected smile. Lily, still glowing with an ethereal light, looked up at her mother, a silent question in her wide, expressive eyes. For the first time, Eleanor saw not just her daughter, but a child who had tasted something extraordinary, something she desperately wanted to share. Lily's hands, usually a tool for basic needs or fleeting anxieties, began to move, tentatively at first. Then, with a sudden burst of animated gestures, they were not the precise, learned signs taught by Lily's instructors, but a spontaneous, almost interpretive dance of fingers and wrists, clearly echoing the man's earlier fluidity. Eleanor watched, a painful knot tightening in her chest. She recognized fragments, the sign for man, perhaps happy, but the narrative Lily was attempting to convey was beyond her grasp. The irony was a bitter pill. The very moment her daughter truly wished to communicate something profound, Eleanor was once again, and perhaps more acutely, left on the outside. A wave of self-reproach, sharp and cold, washed over her. She, Eleanor Vance, CEO of one of the nation's leading tech conglomerates, a woman whose every decision was meticulously calculated and whose every investment was a step towards an envisioned future, had been blindsided by a fundamental truth she had overlooked. She had poured millions into advanced cochlear implants, into speech therapy, into cutting-edge educational programs, all aimed at integrating Lily into the hearing world, at making her like everyone else. But she had neglected the very language of Lily's soul, the visual poetry that had just so effortlessly connected two strangers. The man, whoever he was, had understood something elemental, something she, with all her resources and fervent love, had missed. The security guard, a hulking presence named Marcus, who usually maintained a stoic impassivity, and now stood with a subtle tremor in his posture, his eyes wide with a shared astonishment. Her executive assistant, Clara, typically a picture of composed efficiency, hovered at a respectful distance, her face a mask of unspoken questions. They had all witnessed the impossible. The silence that followed the man's departure was not empty. It was laden with the weight of revelation, a collective recognition of a moment that defied the mundane. The man had simply nodded, a gentle, almost apologetic gesture, and melted back into the bustling anonymity of the company lobby, leaving behind a profound stillness in the executive echelons. Eleanor's mind, usually a finely tuned machine, whirred with a chaotic blend of emotions. Some professional protocol dictated an immediate debriefing of a security breach, an unknown individual gaining such intimate access to her, to Lily, in her private office. Yet, the logical, CEO part of her brain was utterly subservient to the maternal, desperate part. Her first, most urgent thought wasn't security, but the overwhelming need to know. Who was he? What was his name? Where had he come from? Why was he here? And more importantly, could he be persuaded to return? The mere thought of him fading into the urban sprawl was a physical ache. She turned to Clara, her voice a low, urgent command, the usual imperiousness tinged with a raw vulnerability. "Clara, do we have any records of that man? Visitor logs? Security footage? Everything." Clara, sensing the shift in her CEO's demeanor, nodded crisply, so her face regaining some professional composure. though her eyes still held a lingering wonder. Immediately, Miss Vance. As Clara moved to her workstation, Eleanor's gaze swept back to Lily, who was now tracing patterns on the polished desk, a faint smile still playing on her lips. It was a private moment of contentment that Eleanor had rarely witnessed, especially not in such a public, formal setting. Lily, usually wary of strangers, had responded to him with an openness that had been heartbreakingly absent, even with some of her own family members. Eleanor walked slowly to her panoramic window, overlooking the steel and glass canyons of the city, but her vision was turned inward. She remembered the countless hours spent with specialists, the solemn faces, the clinical assessments, the initial diagnosis, delivered with practiced empathy, had felt like a death sentence to her hopes for Lily. Bilateral, profound sensorineural hearing loss. A torrent of medical jargon had followed, recommendations, prognoses, all delivered with an air of detached expertise. But none of them had ever truly addressed the aching loneliness she felt for her daughter, the frustration of a brilliant young mind trapped behind a wall of silence. She had pushed, as she always did. She had researched, demanded, funded. She had built a fortress of support around Lily, a gilded cage designed to protect and enable. But in her relentless pursuit of a cure, a fix, she had perhaps overlooked the simplest, most human of connections. The man, with his kind eyes and gentle hands, had not sought to mend Lily's ears, but to speak directly to her spirit. He hadn't seen a disability. Nay, he had seen a different way of understanding. And in that moment, he had made her laugh. A genuine, unself-conscious laugh. A sound that, even though she couldn't hear it perfectly, she felt deep in her bones. A tremor of pure joy. Her phone buzzed, a stark reminder of the world she commanded. An urgent message from her board about the pending acquisition of Solaris Tech, a deal that could redefine her company's market share for the next decade. Usually, such a message would command her immediate, undivided attention, igniting her strategic mind. Today, it felt like an annoying fly, buzzing against the window pane of her consciousness, an irrelevant distraction. The Solaris deal, the billions at stake, the countless hours of negotiation, all of it suddenly paled in comparison to the single, fleeting image of her daughter's delighted face. As the professional Eleanor Vance, the ruthless dealmaker, the visionary CEO, was momentarily eclipsed by a mother who had just glimpsed a new frontier of possibility for her child. The internal conflict was a brutal one. How could she reconcile the cold, hard logic of her corporate empire with the tender, irrational hope that had just bloomed in her heart? The man was an enigma, a random variable in her meticulously calculated life. Yet, he held a key, a secret language that spoke to Lily's heart in a way nothing else ever had. Could she, should she, risk everything to find him? What would it mean for her reputation, for her company, to pursue a man who had briefly appeared in her office, seemingly by chance, and whose only credential was his ability to make her deaf daughter smile? The questions swirled, unanswered, creating a vortex of uncertainty in her usually unshakable mind. Clara returned, a security tablet in hand, her expression a mix of triumph and bewilderment. "Mrs. Vance, we have him on footage. He was here for a scheduled interview, for a position in the mailroom." Eleanor froze, the last word echoing in her ears like a foreign language. The mailroom? A man with such profound communicative empathy, such an innate understanding interviewing for a mailroom position? The incongruity of it was jarring. It was a pattern interrupt in the most dramatic sense, shattering her nascent romanticization of him as some kind of benevolent, perhaps professional helper. He wasn't a specialist she could hire. He was a potential employee, applying for one of the most entry-level positions in her sprawling corporation. The contrast between his humble aspiration and the extraordinary impact he had just made was staggering. "His name?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with a newfound urgency. Clara scrolled, then looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze with a hint of concern. "Liam O'Connell, single father according to his resume. No specific sign language qualifications listed, but a note from the HR interviewer mentions his exceptionally calm and observant demeanor. Liam O'Connell." The name felt strangely ordinary for a man who had just orchestrated a miracle. Single father. The words resonated with Eleanor, herself a single mother, albeit one in an entirely different socioeconomic strata. But the shared experience of solitary parenthood created a subtle, unexpected thread of connection. What were his circumstances? What struggles had he faced? And how had a man applying for a mailroom job come to possess such a rare and precious gift? The thought of him, now likely making his way home, unaware of the seismic shift he had caused in the life of Eleanor Vance and her daughter, gnawed at her. She had let him walk away. The regret was immediate and potent, but there was also a determination, cold and sharp. She would not let this moment be fleeting. This wasn't just about Lily's smile. It was about opening a door to a world Eleanor hadn't even known existed, a world where her daughter was not just accommodated, but truly seen and heard. In her own unique language, she knew what she had to do. The Solaris deal could wait. The board could wait. The entire corporate empire she had so painstakingly built felt momentarily insignificant. There was something more vital, more profound, nigh at stake. She looked at Lily, who was now gazing out the window, her small face alight with an expression of quiet contemplation, a stark contrast to her usual guardedness. The smile had receded, but the memory, the feeling of it, clearly lingered. Eleanor knew with a certainty that bypassed all logic that she had to find Liam O'Connell. She had to understand the source of that magic. She had to bring that joy back to her daughter. The path forward was unclear, fraught with professional risks and personal unknowns. But for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a flicker of real, uncomplicated hope. The question was not if she would find him, but how she would convince him to re-enter her meticulously constructed, yet suddenly incomplete, world. The chase had begun. The world outside the glass walls of Sarah's executive office, a panorama of steel and shimmering ambition, seemed to pixelate and dissolve into an indistinct blur. Her carefully cultivated composure, usually an unyielding fortress against the relentless demands of her empire, crumbled, leaving her suspended in a fragile, breathless vacuum. The image replayed, burnt into her retinas. Lily's face, illuminated not by the harsh, artificial light of the corporate lobby, but by an internal spark, a radiant, almost otherworldly glow. A smile. Not the polite, hesitant curve of lips she sometimes coaxed with an expensive toy or a fleeting caress, but a genuine, unburdened, joyous explosion of delight. It was a smile that had been absent from her daughter's countenance for what felt like an eternity, a ghost she had chased through countless therapy sessions, specialist appointments, and despairing nights. And it had been conjured, effortlessly, by a man she barely knew, a single father whose hands, not his voice, had spoken to her daughter. The sheer, unadulterated force of that realization hit her with the physical impact of a blow, leaving her gasping, though no sound escaped her lips. Shame, hot and acrid, mixed with a bewildering surge of something akin to awe, cascaded through her. She, Sarah Sterling, the formidable architect of Sterling Innovations, capable of dissecting complex market trends, orchestrating multi-million-dollar deals, and inspiring a workforce of thousands, had been utterly, profoundly inept at reaching the one person who mattered most, her own child. She had poured every resource, every ounce of her considerable intellect and boundless drive into understanding Lily's world, into bridging the chasm of silence that separated them. She had read every book, consulted every expert, subscribed to every innovative program. Yet, it was the gentle, fluid dance of this man's fingers, an unspoken symphony that had unlocked the melody within her daughter. The envy was a bitter pill, quickly swallowed and pushed down, replaced by a desperate, burgeoning hope that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. It was a hope that brought with it a fresh wave of vulnerability, a stark reminder of all her failures. Hours later, the hum of her office felt oppressive, the meticulously arranged minimalist decor suddenly cold and alien. The reports on her desk, demanding immediate attention, lay untouched, their figures and projections meaningless. Her mind, usually a finely tuned machine, whirred aimlessly, stuck on a single frame, Lily's radiant face tilting up towards the man, her small hands mimicking the nascent awkward movements he had demonstrated. The memory was both a balm and a barb. It brought a lump to her throat, a sensation she rarely allowed herself in this professional sanctuary. Who was he? Her memory, usually photographic, struggled to recall the specifics of their brief, almost perfunctory interactions. A new employee? Perhaps in the building services, or delivery driver she occasionally saw in the lobby. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, an unassuming presence that had, until this moment, rendered him invisible in her high-octane world. Now he was the only thing she could see. She thought of his hands, strong, calloused, yet moving with an almost balletic grace. What stories did those hands tell? What life had shaped them to possess such an unexpected, potent language? The next morning, driven by an insatiable curiosity that bordered on obsession, Sarah found herself descending from her executive eyrie earlier than usual. She told herself it was to review the new security protocols for the lobby, a plausible excuse to her assistant. But her true mission was far more personal. She wanted to observe, to understand. The lobby, usually a transient space, now felt like a stage, and she was an uninvited audience member, scrutinizing every nuance. She positioned herself discreetly near a bank of elevators, feigning interest in her phone, her gaze subtly sweeping the entrance. When he finally appeared, and pushing a cleaning cart laden with various supplies, she felt an almost imperceptible tightening in her chest. He was dressed in a dark blue uniform, practical and unadorned. His movements were efficient, methodical, yet possessed a quiet rhythm that spoke of purpose. He moved with the almost imperceptible grace of someone deeply comfortable in their own skin, untroubled by the hurried, anxious energy that typically permeated the corporate environment. Sarah watched him interact with a security guard, a brief nod, a small exchange of words she couldn't discern. He wasn't overtly friendly, but not withdrawn either, simply present. Her gaze followed him as he navigated through the throng of early morning commuters. Then she saw it. A little girl, perhaps 5 or 6, clinging to his hand, her small head barely reaching his hip. Yeah, the girl was undeniably deaf. Her eyes wide and intelligent, constantly scanned her surroundings, her movements precise, as if her other senses were heightened to compensate for the auditory world she couldn't access. The man leaned down and his hands began to move, a silent conversation flowing between them. The girl's face, initially serious, broke into a small, fond smile. It was a quieter joy than Lily's explosive laugh, but no less profound. This was his daughter. This was his everyday. A fresh wave of insight, sharp and undeniable, washed over Sarah. He wasn't just a man who knew sign language. He lived it. It was the fabric of his family, the very air they breathed. This wasn't a skill learned from a textbook or a weekend workshop. It was an ingrained, lived experience. And suddenly, the ease, the naturalness of his interaction with Lily made perfect, heartbreaking sense. He saw Lily not as a problem to be solved, or a challenge to be overcome, but as a person, communicating in a language as natural to him as spoken English was to her. Sarah felt a peculiar pang, a sense of having stumbled upon a hidden world, a vibrant culture she had, in her privileged bubble, utterly overlooked. All her expensive therapists had focused on teaching Lily to adapt to the hearing world, on auditory training, on speech therapy, on cochlear implants, a litany of interventions aimed at fixing Lily, rather than truly connecting with her. They had taught Lily the rules of a game she didn't want to play, while this man simply spoke her language, literally and figuratively. Later that day, confined to the sterile grandeur of her office once more, the incident with the cleaning cart replayed in her mind, layering new meaning onto the previous day's miracle. She recalled a conversation with a renowned audiologist months ago, a woman whose clipped professional tone had offered little comfort. "Mrs. Sterling," she had said, adjusting her glasses, "Lily has profound sensorineural hearing loss. While we can explore advanced amplification options, fostering a comprehensive communication environment, perhaps including a visual language, will be paramount for her cognitive and emotional development." Sarah had nodded vaguely, her mind already racing towards the next quarterly report, dismissing the visual language as a secondary, perhaps optional, accessory. She had wanted Lily to be normal, to fit in, to navigate her world. Now, she understood the profound arrogance in that desire. The silence of her office, usually a symbol of her control and focus, now felt like a suffocating shroud, mirroring the isolating silence Lily experienced daily. She thought of Lily's quiet withdrawal, the way her eyes often seemed distant, observing a world she couldn't fully participate in. The frustration, the tantrums born of incomprehension, the subtle but undeniable wall that had grown between them. Sarah had interpreted it as Lily's difficult nature, her resistance, her unique challenge. Now she questioned everything. Was it not resistance, but desperation? Not a challenge, but a profound yearning for understanding? The image of Lily's smile, then, transformed from a fleeting moment of joy into a scathing indictment of Sarah's own limitations, her tunnel vision. She had built an empire on innovation, on seeing what others missed, on understanding unspoken market needs. Yet, in her personal life, she had been blind to the most fundamental need of all, genuine, unadulterated connection with her own child. The realization was a devastating blow to her self-perception, a fissure in the bedrock of her carefully constructed identity. She, the formidable CEO, was in fact profoundly, deeply ignorant in the most important realm of her life. The next few days blurred into a pattern of enforced observation. Sarah found herself subtly altering her schedule, inventing reasons to pass through the lobby at specific times, always keeping a careful distance. She watched the man, whose name she still didn't know as he went about his work. He was thorough, efficient, but never hurried. She saw him exchange brief, signed pleasantries with his daughter at drop-off and pickup, their hands weaving intricate stories in the air. She noticed the quiet patience in his eyes, the way he would pause, really look at his daughter before responding. He was a stark contrast to the frantic energy that defined her own life. Sarah's existence was a relentless pursuit of efficiency, optimization, and quantifiable results. Every minute was budgeted, every interaction purposeful. This man, however, exuded a different kind of wealth, a wealth of presence, of mindful interaction. It was a quality she desperately lacked, a missing piece in the complex puzzle of her daughter's happiness, and by extension, her own. One afternoon, she witnessed a small, almost insignificant interaction that resonated deeply. A young executive, engrossed in his phone, almost bumped into the man's daughter near the elevator. The man, without a word, subtly shifted his cart, creating a protective barrier for his child, his movements so smooth, they almost went unnoticed. There was no anger, no reprimand, just a quiet, vigilant guardianship. It was a protective instinct Sarah understood intimately as a mother, yet his execution of it was so different from her own, often stressed, overcompensating efforts. The memory of Lily's isolation, particularly during their rare social outings, resurfaced with excruciating clarity. The awkward silences, the well-meaning but ultimately futile attempts of others to communicate with her, the way Lily would retreat into herself, her eyes downcast. Sarah would feel a tight knot of frustration and helplessness, often retreating herself, and pulling Lily away from situations that highlighted their inability to connect. She had attributed Lily's struggles to her deafness, but now she wondered, had it been their shared inability to communicate, their collective failure to bridge that silent gap, that had caused so much pain? The silence was a tangible entity now, not just an absence of sound, but a heavy, oppressive presence that permeated her thoughts. It felt like a barrier she had erected herself unknowingly around Lily and around her own heart. The man, this silent maestro, had simply bypassed it, transcended it with the effortless grace of his hands. He hadn't sought to break the silence. He had transformed it into a canvas for conversation, for laughter, for connection. Or Sarah's professional world began to feel increasingly dissonant with this newfound internal turmoil. Board meetings, shareholder calls, strategic partnerships, the very pillars of her success, now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Her colleagues noticed a subtle shift, a momentary distraction in her usually laser-focused gaze, a slight hesitation in her typically decisive pronouncements. She would catch herself, forcibly pulling her mind back to the financial projections, to the market analyses, but the image of Lily's smile and the gentle signing hands that conjured it was a relentless undertow, pulling her away from the familiar shores of her corporate identity. She found herself, for the first time in years, truly questioning her priorities, her sacrifices. Had the relentless pursuit of professional excellence come at the cost of the most precious thing in her life? The thought was a chilling echo in the cavernous space of her success. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, unresolved, yet demanding immediate and profound consideration. The CEO, who could conquer any market, felt utterly powerless, her carefully constructed world teetering on the brink of an emotional precipice, all because of a fleeting smile and a pair of hands that spoke a language she did not understand. And the man who held the key to unlocking that smile remained an enigma, a quiet presence in the periphery of her powerful, yet profoundly unfulfilled life. The path forward was obscured, fraught with the daunting challenge of acknowledging her own immense failings and stepping into a world she had stubbornly, ignorantly resisted. The soft hum of the air conditioning unit in Isabella's office seemed to fade into an imperceptible whisper, drowned out by the thunderous roar of emotions suddenly unleashed within her. She stood, frozen, at the panoramic window overlooking the meticulously landscaped corporate garden, her gaze riveted not on the symmetrical patterns of manicured greenery or the distant city skyline, but on a small, vibrant patch of color beneath a blossoming cherry tree. There, bathed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the delicate petals, was Lily and Daniel. The scene unfolding before her eyes was, to Isabella, a tapestry woven from disbelief and an agonizingly beautiful hope she had long suppressed. Daniel, the single father, the unassuming man she had dismissed as just another cog in the vast machinery of her corporation, was signing with a fluidity and grace that spoke not of practiced skill, but of an innate, joyful communication. His hands, strong yet gentle, moved through the air like a dancer's, creating a silent symphony that Isabella, despite her years of observation, had never truly understood. He wasn't just translating words, he was conveying emotion, warmth, a profound sense of connection that bypassed the need for auditory sensation. He had just completed a particularly elaborate sequence, his face alight with a playful mischief that Isabella had never witnessed on any adult interacting with her daughter. Lily, typically a portrait of quiet contemplation, her eyes often downcast or fixed on some distant, unseen point, was different today, and her head was tilted, her small body leaning forward, captivated. Daniel's hands articulated a story, a whimsical narrative involving a mischievous squirrel and a giant sleepy bear, his eyebrows dancing, his lips forming silent, exaggerated expressions that mirrored the tale. He concluded the story with a flourish, his hands pausing midair, a question implicit in his posture, a playful challenge in his gaze. And then it happened. It wasn't a flicker, not a transient shift of muscles. It began subtly, a faint upward curve at the corners of Lily's mouth, a tentative exploration of an unfamiliar emotion. Then, as Daniel mimicked the bear, finally waking with a dramatic silent yawn, her eyes, usually so serious, crinkled at the edges. A tiny giggle escaped her. Now, a sound Isabella recognized only from old home videos shot before Lily's hearing loss had fully manifested. A sound she hadn't heard in years. A sound she had mournfully accepted she might never hear again. But this sound, this visual manifestation of pure joy, was even more potent. The smile bloomed. It wasn't forced, nor was it fleeting. It was wide, uninhibited, a radiant burst of sunshine on a face that Isabella had come to associate with quiet resignation. Lily's whole being seemed to illuminate from within, her small shoulders shaking with silent laughter, her hands mimicking Daniel's movements, not precisely, but with an enthusiastic abandon that spoke volumes. She was signing back, imperfectly, but signing with an urgency, a desire to participate, to be seen and understood, that Isabella had only ever dreamed of. Her daughter, her beautiful, isolated Lily, was genuinely, unequivocally happy. And it was all because of this man, this stranger, who communicated with her not through pity or obligation, but with genuine delight. A gasp, sharp and involuntary, tore from Isabella's throat, shattering the silence of her opulent office. Her hand flew to her mouth, not to stifle the sound, but as if to contain the raw, visceral shock that coursed through her. Her legs, which had felt rooted to the floor, now trembled uncontrollably, threatening to give way. She stumbled backward, bumping against the edge of her polished mahogany desk, her eyes never leaving the scene below. A single tear, hot and unbidden, traced a path down her cheek, followed swiftly by another and another until her vision blurred. The vibrant colors of the garden melting into an indistinct wash. This wasn't just a smile. This was a revelation. It was the undoing of years of carefully constructed walls, the demolition of every cynical thought she'd harbored about her ability to reach her daughter. She had spent fortunes on specialists, on cutting-edge therapies, on communication aids, all with limited success. She had read countless books, attended endless workshops, hired the most skilled interpreters, and yet with all her resources, all her power, she had never evoked this kind of unadulterated joy from Lily. She had approached Lily's deafness as a problem to be solved, a challenge to be overcome with logic and superior resources, when what Lily had needed all along was simply connection. Pure, unadulterated, empathetic connection. Isabella thought back to the countless times she had signed to Lily, her movements precise, correct, often stiff, feeling more like a chore than an act of love. She remembered the frustration, the gnawing guilt, the sense of failure that would settle heavy on her chest when Lily would turn away, her face impassive. She had assumed it was her fault, her inadequacy as a mother, her inability to bridge the chasm of silence. But Daniel, with his unassuming demeanor, his worn work clothes, and his simple, sincere gestures, had found the bridge. He hadn't just spoken to Lily's eyes. He had spoken to her soul. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of fragmented memories and dawning realizations. She recalled her initial dismissiveness when Daniel had first been hired, seeing him as just another number, another asset to be managed. She remembered the subtle friction, the quiet pride she'd taken in her own intellect, her strategic acumen, which had often overshadowed her capacity for simple human empathy. She had built an empire, meticulously constructed and ruthlessly defended, believing that success lay in efficiency, in calculated risks, in the relentless pursuit of growth. And yet, the most profound breakthrough in her personal life, the one she cherished more than any boardroom victory, had come from an unquantifiable, unexpected source: kindness. The raw emotion that surged through her was a complex cocktail of profound gratitude, agonizing regret, and an almost overwhelming sense of humility. She, Isabella Thorne, the titan of industry, who commanded respect and instilled fear in equal measure, was reduced to a trembling, as weeping woman by the sight of her daughter's smile. It was a potent, undeniable testament to the fact that some things, the most important things, lay beyond the reach of wealth or power. They resided in the quiet corners of the human heart, in the willingness to see, to understand, to connect without agenda. She watched as Daniel, utterly oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in the CEO's office above, continued to engage Lily. He signed a question, his eyes twinkling, and Lily, still smiling, responded with an excited flurry of her own hands, a whole story bursting forth from her, uninhibited, unburdened. It was a dance, a conversation, a bond that transcended the limitations Isabella had always perceived. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the garden. Daniel eventually signed a gentle farewell, ruffling Lily's hair, and with a final lingering smile, Lily signed back before turning to walk slowly back towards the main building. She looked back once, just for a moment, and her eyes, though distant, held a spark, a warmth Isabella hadn't seen in years. It was a spark Daniel had ignited. Isabella straightened, taking a shaky breath, the tears finally subsiding, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. Her initial shock morphed into a clear, undeniable directive. This man, Daniel, was not just an employee. He was a catalyst, a living embodiment of what her company, and perhaps even her own life, had been missing. His approach, his intuitive understanding, his sheer human decency had achieved what countless hours of therapy and untold sums of money could not. He had reached Lily, and he had made her smile. Her reflection in the darkened glass of the window showed a woman transformed. The hardened lines of her corporate mask had softened. Her eyes, though still red-rimmed, now held a new light, a glimmer of hope, a profound understanding. The carefully cultivated image of the unyielding CEO had fractured, revealing the vulnerable, yearning mother beneath. She moved swiftly, her earlier paralysis giving way to purposeful action. There would be no more delays, no more detached observations. She would meet Daniel not as his CEO, but as Lily's mother. She needed to understand, to learn, to express a gratitude that felt too immense for words alone. More than that, she realized she needed to change. Not just her approach to Lily, but her approach to everything. Her company, her life, her very definition of success. It was no longer about maximizing profits or expanding market share. It was about fostering connection, recognizing individual worth, and cultivating the kind of empathy Daniel so effortlessly embodied. The next morning, Isabella called Daniel into her office, not for a performance review or a new project assignment, but for a conversation that would forever alter the course of their lives. She sat him down, not across her imposing desk, but in the comfortable armchairs of her informal meeting area. She spoke not of business metrics, but of a small girl and the profound, unexpected gift he had given her. She laid bare her own struggles, her failures, her desperate longing to connect with her daughter. She offered him not a promotion, but a partnership. She proposed creating a new division within her company, one dedicated to inclusive communication, to fostering environments where every individual, regardless of their challenges, felt seen, heard, and valued. She wanted Daniel to lead it, to bring his unique blend of empathy and skill to a global scale, to touch countless other lives as he had touched Lily's. Daniel, initially bewildered, then moved, accepted. He spoke of his own journey as a single father, of the universal human need for belonging. He shared stories of other children like Lily, children who longed for a voice, for a connection. From that day forward, Isabella Thorne's empire began to shift, slowly but irrevocably. The corridors of Thorne Industries, once bustling with efficient but impersonal urgency, began to hum with a different kind of energy. Sign language classes became available to all employees, not as a mandate, but as an opportunity. Accessibility wasn't just a compliance checklist. It became a cornerstone of their corporate philosophy. Isabella, once known for her formidable intellect and ruthless ambition, was now increasingly recognized for her deep-seated commitment to human connection. Lily, no longer just the CEO's deaf daughter, blossomed. She started attending an inclusive school, her confidence soaring. Her smiles became a regular feature, vibrant and free. Her bond with Daniel deepened, a silent, joyful understanding that became a constant source of comfort and growth. And slowly, tentatively, her relationship with her mother transformed. Isabella, learning from Daniel, from Lily, began to sign with more than just her hands. She signed with her heart. She learned to truly see her daughter, to understand her world not as a barrier, but as a unique and beautiful landscape to be explored together. The stunning revelation of Lily's smile, brought forth by a simple act of genuine communication from an unexpected source, served as Isabella's greatest epiphany. It was a powerful, undeniable truth that the greatest successes are not always measured in profit margins or market shares, but in the profound, often quiet triumphs of human connection. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most extraordinary solutions emerge from the most ordinary of hearts. A reminder that empathy, compassion, and the willingness to truly see another person can dismantle the highest walls and bridge the widest chasms, allowing joy to bloom in the most unexpected of places. And in the silent, radiant smile of a little girl, a powerful CEO found her truest purpose. Forever changed by the eloquence of a single dad's hands.